You're standing on a city street. Look up, and you see the towers, the part everyone photographs. But the most complicated machine in this entire city runs the other way. Straight down, under your shoes. I'm an architect, and I want to do something simple. Cut one ordinary block open and go down through it. Not the pipes right under the pavement. Those are a whole story of their own, and we've told it elsewhere. I mean past them, down and down and down, into a buried city most people never picture. And the strangest part, nobody has a complete map of what's down there. Not one. Let's go find the bottom. 1 block. Straight down. How deep does a city actually go? Here's the thing about the top few feet. Just below the pavement, there's a chaotic tangle: water, gas, electric, fiber, all crammed together by a century of different companies. It's a brilliant, messy story, and it's the reason your street is forever being dug up. But it's the shallow story. We've told it elsewhere. Today we start where it ends. Because under that crowded shallow band, the ground doesn't go quiet, it goes big. The systems get rarer, older, and far more massive. The deeper you go, the fewer people have ever seen what's there. So picture one clean vertical slice through the block, and let's drop below the pipes, into the part of the city built for the long dark. This is the descent. The first thing we pass is the bottom of the everyday system, the sewer. Not the shallow pipes, but the big gravity drains they all feed into. These have to sit below everything they collect, because they work on nothing but slope. Waste flows downhill, slowly, in the dark, with no pump, sometimes for miles. So as a city grows, its sewers are forced deeper and deeper just to keep falling. And here's where it gets strange. In a lot of cities, that old gravity system simply can't cope anymore. Every heavy storm, the sewers fill, and raw overflow spills into the rivers. So engineers went under the sewers and built something enormous to catch it. In Chicago, they bored what's literally called the deep tunnel, around 110 miles of tunnel, up to 33 feet across. As much as 350 feet underground. That's a hole you could drive 2 trucks through, side by side. Sunk deeper than a 30-story building is tall, and it exists purely to swallow a single storm's worth of sewage before it reaches the lake. And it isn't only Chicago. London, Paris, Singapore, nearly every great old city has now bored a super sewer far beneath its original drains. Because the 19th century pipes were never built for 21st century rain. Think about that gap. Up top, a brick drain your grandparents' city built. Far beneath it, a tunnel so vast it's measured against skyscrapers, doing the same job because the old one ran out of room. This is the pattern for the whole descent. Every time the city outgrew a layer, it didn't replace it. It went deeper and built a bigger one underneath. And almost none of it shows up on any map you can pull up. We've passed the sewers. Keep going down. Next we hit the layer most people know is there, but never picture in section. The subway. And the first surprise is that there isn't one depth. There are 2 completely different kinds. The oldest lines were built by cut and cover. Dig a giant trench straight down the street, build a box, bury it. So those sit just under the surface, right up against the pipes. But you can only do that to a city once. Once the shallow ground is full of sewers, full of cables, full of basements, there's no room left to trench. So the newer lines go under everything, bored deep through the ground like a worm. In London, the deepest station, Hampstead, sits 192 feet down, so far below the street it has no escalators at all. Just lifts and an emergency stair of 320 steps. And building one of these is the hardest spatial puzzle in the city. You're not just digging a tunnel. You're threading a 20-foot tube through 100 years of buried stuff you must not break, ducking under one sewer, swerving around a water main, sliding over a gas line. All of it half-mapped, some of it not mapped at all, Engineers call hitting an unknown buried object a surprise. In the deep city, surprises are expensive. So the metro isn't the bottom. It's not even close. It's just the biggest tenet, a structure the size of a building, laid on its side and buried, threading through the gaps left by everything that came before it. And below the subway floor, the ground keeps going. There's a whole city left under the trains. Now look at what's holding the towers up, because it reaches deeper than you'd ever guess. A skyscraper doesn't sit on the ground. The ground is too soft. It sits on the rock beneath the ground, and to get there, the building punches a forest of columns straight down through the soil until they hit solid bedrock. Piles, caissons, and how deep that goes depends entirely on how far down the rock is. In Manhattan, the bedrock is a roller coaster. In Times Square, it's barely 18 feet down, which is exactly why the skyscrapers cluster there. The rock is easy to reach. But drift to Greenwich Village, and that same rock plunges to 260 feet down. That's why there are almost no towers there. You'd have to drive a foundation the depth of a 20-story building just to find something solid to stand on. The skyline you see above ground is really a map of the rock you can't see below it. And these foundations are the most permanent thing humans build. The tower might be demolished in 80 years, but the caissons stay in the ground essentially forever, a fossil record of every building that ever stood on the block. Dig a new foundation in an old city, and one of the first things you hit is the last building's foundation, still down there in the dark. So now our section has two giant vertical elements crossing each other, the subway, threading sideways, and the foundations, plunging down through it toward the rock. And we still haven't reached the deepest layer. The biggest tunnels of all are bored into the bedrock itself, below even the foundations. Down we go. Before the very bottom, there's a layer that's pure mystery, the forgotten one. Some cities have buried systems down here that almost no one alive remembers building. Under Manhattan runs a giant network of steam, actual high-pressure steam, piped beneath the streets since 1882, heating some of the most famous buildings in the world that have no boiler of their own. The Empire State, Grand Central, the UN. Over 100 miles of it, the largest steam system on Earth. Those white plumes you see rising from street vents and tall orange and white stacks. That's not smoke. That's the system breathing. A 19th century idea, still hissing away under a 21st century city. And steam is just the one that still works. Down here too are the ghosts. Pneumatic tubes that once fired mail across town in capsules at 30 miles an hour, sealed up and abandoned. Old trolley tunnels, bricked off and forgotten. Coal vaults under the pavement. Lower station platforms, walled away when the lines changed. Because here's the rule of the deep city. We almost never dig anything out. It's too expensive, and it's holding up the dirt. So when a system dies, we don't remove it. We just seal the ends and leave it down there, forever, and build the next thing around the corpse. Every old city is layered with its own abandoned past. Tunnel inside tunnel. A whole archaeology of dead infrastructure that the people walking above have no idea they're standing on. And this is exactly why no complete map exists. You can map what you build. You cannot easily map 150 years of things people forgot they buried. One layer left. The deepest of all. And now, the bottom. Down in the bedrock, below the foundations, below the subway, below the deep sewers, lives the most massive infrastructure of all, and the one almost nobody has heard of. Beneath New York, engineers have spent over 50 years boring City Water Tunnel Number 3. More than 60 miles of tunnel, blasted through solid rock, sections 500 feet down, some passages cited as deep as 800, carrying the drinking water of the entire city. They started in 1970. It is the largest capital construction project in New York's history, around $6 billion. Bigger than any bridge, any tower. And it has been going so long that workers who began on it have retired, and their children now work the same tunnel. Sections opened in 1998 and 2013. The rest is due around 2032. 6 decades, in the dark, in the rock, for a tunnel almost no New Yorker will ever see or think about. Why so deep? Because down in the bedrock there's room, and the rock itself holds the tunnel open under enormous pressure. The shallow city is a chaotic pileup. The deep city is the opposite. Clean, vast, deliberate, singular. One perfect bore through solid stone, built to last not decades, but centuries. And there's a haunting reason it exists at all. The old tunnels it's meant to back up, tunnels 1 and 2, have run nonstop for over 100 years, and they've never once been shut off and drained for inspection. They simply can't be. Shut them down, and the city goes dry. That's the whole point of Tunnel 3. So that, for the first time in a century, engineers can finally close a valve and look inside the others. A 60-mile, 60-year tunnel, bored through bedrock, just so the city can finally inspect the pipes it's been blindly trusting since before anyone alive was born. This is the floor of everything. The thing the whole block ultimately stands on, and drinks from, and will never lay eyes on. And incredibly, even this isn't always the deepest a city goes. At the very bottom, in the deepest cities, the rock holds something that looks less like infrastructure and more like a buried temple. Outside Tokyo, to stop the city flooding, engineers spent 14 years carving out a chain of chambers and tunnels around 160 feet down. The biggest hall is so vast it's held up by 59 concrete pillars, each weighing 500 tons. A cathedral-sized room, kept empty and dark, waiting for the one storm a year it has to swallow. Pillars that big aren't holding up a roof. They're pinning the whole structure down, because when the chamber floods, the groundwater pressure outside would otherwise float it up out of the earth like a boat. A 500-ton column, just to stop a building from rising. People literally call the place the underground temple. And that's the right word for this whole bottom layer. Because what's down here, in the bedrock under one ordinary block, isn't pipes and wires anymore. It's the heaviest, most permanent, most invisible things our civilization builds. Deep tunnels, giant foundations, buried cathedrals of concrete, all sitting in the dark, doing their work, for 100 years at a time, under the feet of people who will never know they're there. That's the floor. That's as deep as the block goes. Now let's climb back up and look at the whole thing at once. So look at the whole section now. From the shallow tangle, we skipped at the top, all the way down. The deep sewers, the subway box, the foundations punched to rock, the steam and the ghosts, the 60-mile water tunnel, the buried flood cathedral on the bedrock floor. Hundreds of feet of city, built up over 150 years by thousands of different hands, with no master plan, and, honestly, no complete map. Cities are only now starting to make one. In 2025, New York funded a project to finally chart its own underground in 3D. Until that exists, the deepest, heaviest, most important city we have is the one nobody can see, and almost nobody has ever drawn. So next time a crew opens your street, don't look at the hole. Look down it. You're looking at the top of a buried world. That's how deep one block goes. If you like the built world cut open like this, honestly, with the myth left out, stick around. The channel's full of these. Subscribe, and let's keep going down.